Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. Instead of great battles and glorious longships sailing to foreign shores to raid and plunder, we're going to talk about the truly mundane, the truly boring, the utterly fascinating world of Viking merchants. Picture yourself, not with a gleaming axe, but with a ledger, a slightly grubby, carved wooden tablet, tucked under your arm. Your hands aren't calloused from a sword hilt, but from coiling rope and handling bolts of wool. You're standing on a muddy riverbank, the air thick with the smell of wet wool, dried fish, and a faint, acrid tang of wood smoke. The sun is just starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a mix of soft oranges and bruised purples. And the lowing of cattle mixes with the squawk of gulls. You're waiting for your ship, the Nar, to be unloaded, its belly full of goods you've hauled all the way from the cold north. Your journey wasn't about fame, it was about profit. This is the quiet history of trade, of commerce, of the Viking who just wanted to make a living. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this story without falling asleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're a night owl just tuning in, let me know where you are and what time it is for you in the comments. I always love to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the cold, damp air seep through your thick wool tunic. It's not the chill of the open sea yet, but the kind of bone-deep dampness that comes from being near a large body of water at dusk. You're not a king, not a jarl, but a simple merchant, a kaupmar. Your wealth isn't measured in gold arm rings won in battle, but in the bales of cloth and the sacks of grain you successfully moved from one port to another. This is your life. It's a bit of a slog. Honestly, your days aren't filled with heroic deeds, but with haggling over prices and ensuring your cargo doesn't get soaked by a sudden downpour. It's the kind of history that rarely gets a movie, which is a real shame because there's a lot to unpack. For instance, a mainstream historical fact is that while the longships are iconic, the workhorse of the Viking economy was the Nar, a sturdier, broader ship designed for carrying large quantities of goods over long distances. Not for quick raids. Imagine a big, lumbering cargo ship compared to a sleek speedboat. That's the difference. Your world is all about the little details. The quality of a beaver pelt, the weight of a bar of silver, the texture of a piece of amber. You've learned to spot a shoddy piece of craftsmanship from a mile away, and you can tell the difference between good Icelandic wool and some of the rougher stuff coming out of the British Isles just by the feel. A quirky tidbit of this life is that sometimes, even in the heart of a bustling trading town, a common form of payment wasn't coin, but a certain type of cloth, specifically a finely woven wool known as vamel. It was so standardized that it functioned as a currency in its own right, with laws regulating its quality and size. It's a bit like if your paycheck came in designer denim instead of cash. And just as there's a lot to learn, there's a lot we still don't know for sure. Historians still argue whether the Viking trading networks were primarily driven by the demand for luxury goods by the elite, or if they were a more widespread, grassroots effort to exchange everyday necessities among common people. You lean against a stack of barrels. Their contents a mystery you'll deal with in the morning. And the question hangs in the damp air with you. The smells of the settlement, a place called Hedeby, are starting to fill the night. You can smell the smoldering embers of the communal fire, the faint, savory scent of meat roasting, and a more unpleasant whiff of refuse from the harbor. You're not in a grand hall, but in a small, cramped longhouse shared with your crew. It's not glorious, but it's a living. You're a part of a quiet revolution. A network of traders and merchants weaving a new kind of tapestry across the known world. Thread by thread, transaction by transaction, the raids get the headlines. But the trade is what built the towns, connected the cultures, and ultimately, gave your people a future. The cold seeps deeper now. A persistent whisper against your skin. You pull your thick tunic tighter, the coarse wool scratching at your neck. A familiar irritation you've long since stopped noticing. This isn't the life of a warrior, bathed in glory and mead. It's the life of a trader. A life of endless routine and mundane tasks that must be done. Every single day, your day began before the first light. Not with a war horn, but with the lowing of the animals being led to market and the clatter of a smith's hammer from across the fjord. Your mornings are for checking the goods, for making sure the tar on the ship's seams is holding, and for haggling with the local farmers who bring their wares to you. You are the nexus, the person who connects a farmer in Norway with a silversmith in Byzantium. No big heroic speeches, just a lot of math in your head and the weight of silver in your hand. You walk past a few of your crew members, a couple of them still half asleep and nursing bowls of thick, nourishing porridge. They grunt a greeting, their faces weathered and their hands scarred from 100 different chores. You trust these people with your life and your livelihood, which, let's be honest, are the same thing out here. You know their families, their homes, their little quirks. A mainstream historical fact about your crew is that they would not have been a formal navy or a professional army. They were, in essence, an ad hoc group of family, friends, and neighbors who had a vested interest in the success of the journey. They were a team, each with their own specialized skills. The shipbuilder, the navigator, the guy who's just really good at keeping the fish from rotting. They're all vital cogs in your little business. They're the reason you're not out here all by yourself. It's like a really ancient, very smelly startup, and you're the CEO. As you step onto the muddy shore, you notice the other merchants. Some are like you, weathered and pragmatic. Others are younger, full of bluster and dreams of a quick profit. You shake your head a little. They'll learn. This life teaches you patience. And it teaches you the value of a well-made rope. You bend down, checking the knot on a bundle of animal hides. You can't afford any mistakes. A quirky tidbit of your daily life is that you don't really have a schedule in the modern sense. Your day is dictated by the tides, the weather, and the sheer amount of daylight available. So when the sun is up, you're working. When it's not, you're sleeping. No 8-hour shifts here. Just a continuous cycle of labor and rest. And, let's not forget the sheer boredom. You spend a lot of time just watching the water, watching the sky, and trying to remember the saga of your great-grandfather to pass the time. It's a lot less exciting than it sounds. Your crew is your most valuable asset. The old saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link is literally true when you're on a ship in the middle of a storm. You've seen what happens to ships with a lazy or inexperienced crew. They're the ones who don't get the cargo secured properly, who fall asleep on watch, and who, frankly, are a liability. You've had to make some hard choices, letting people go who just couldn't hack it. It's a cutthroat world, and you can't afford sentimentality. Historians still argue whether these crews were paid in a fixed share of the profits, or if their compensation was a more complex system based on their contribution and social standing. You, however, know that the most reliable payment is a fair share and a reputation for being an honest leader. That's what keeps the good people coming back for the next journey. You stand on the shore, a quiet but firm presence, overseeing the controlled chaos of unloading. The work is hard, the pay is uncertain, but it's yours. This is your kingdom, and your throne is a muddy patch of ground by the harbor. The last of the cargo is finally ashore. A great relief you feel deep in your bones. The sun has completely vanished, and the stars are starting to prickle the inky black sky. You're now heading towards the shipbuilding area, not just to admire the craft, but to inspect the very thing that makes your livelihood possible, your ship. It's a nar, not a longship. This is a crucial distinction. The kind of boring but essential detail that separates the flashy warriors from the pragmatic merchants. The longships were for show, for speed, for raiding. They were sleek, narrow, and had a shallow draft, perfect for getting up rivers to surprise a village. Your ship, on the other hand, is built for business. It's wide, with a deep hull to hold all that lovely, profitable cargo. It's the difference between a sports car and a massive semi-truck. And you, my friend, are the proud driver of the semi. As you approach the dock, the smell of fresh-cut pine and tar is almost overpowering. But it's a good smell. A smell of security, of potential profit. You run your hand along the smooth, curved hull of a ship in progress, marveling at the craftsmanship. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking ships, including the Nar, were constructed using a clinker-built method. This meant that the planks of the hull overlapped each other and were fastened together with iron rivets. A technique that made the ships incredibly strong yet flexible enough to withstand the brutal force of open ocean waves. It's a bit like building your house with overlapping sheets of plywood instead of a single wall. Which sounds weird, but it totally works. This method, a testament to Viking engineering, is the reason your ancestors were able to cross oceans in boats made mostly of wood and rope. You walk toward your own ship, the Sea Goose, a name you picked yourself. And you're quite proud of it. And step aboard. The deck feels solid under your feet. A reassuring presence. You inspect the mast, the thick ropes, and the great square sail made of sturdy wool. A quirky tidbit is that these sails were often dyed a deep red with a special pigment derived from madder root, which not only looked cool but also helped to protect the wool fibers from sun and saltwater. Imagine the cost of a sail like that. It would have been an astronomical sum, the equivalent of buying a brand new car today. You run your hand over the mast and recall the tedious process of raising it. A Herculean effort that required the whole crew working in unison. It's a dance you all know by heart. The ship itself is more than just planks and rivets. It's your home, your business, and your lifeline. It's your most important asset. And its condition is a direct reflection of your financial health. A crack in a plank, a frayed rope, a leak in the hull. These are not just minor inconveniences. They are potential catastrophes. You owe it to yourself and your crew to keep this ship in peak condition. Historians still argue whether the ships were owned by a single captain or if they were a collective investment from a group of merchants. You, however, are the sole proprietor of the Sea Goose, and the weight of that ownership feels heavy in your shoulders. You inspect the storage areas below deck, thinking about the journey ahead. You'll need to secure your next load of goods, pack enough provisions for the long trip, and make sure your crew is rested and ready. You turn to your first mate, a grizzled old man with a squint and a missing ear, and nod. He knows what you're thinking. The work is never done. Not for a merchant. The sea calls, and you must be ready. You finally retire to your shared quarters, the air thick with the scent of bodies and stale wood smoke. As you lie on your hard sleeping pallet, you can feel the rhythmic rocking of the ship, even while it's docked. It's a gentle reminder of the true nature of your life. You are a creature of the sea. But this is no aimless wandering. Your journeys are carefully planned. Even without the satellite maps and GPS devices that the future will invent. You are a navigator, a master of a craft that relies on observation, intuition, and a few clever, low-tech tools. Before you can even begin to think about where you're going, you need to know where you are. And to do that, you rely on the sun and the stars. The great, dependable clocks in the sky. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking navigators were incredibly skilled at using the sun's position and the constellations to maintain their bearings. On a clear day, you would use a simple sun compass, a small wooden disc with a gnomon, a little pin, in the middle. The shadow it cast would tell you the direction. It's a simple, elegant system, almost childlike in its simplicity. But it worked perfectly. It's a bit like using a stick in the ground to tell time. But for direction, and when the sun wasn't available, when the clouds rolled in, you relied on the stars, committing their patterns and movements to memory. But what about when the weather turns foul and you can't see the sun or stars for days? This is where a quirky tidbit of Viking navigation comes in. You would use a sunstone, a crystal, possibly Iceland's spar or quarterite, that could polarize light. By holding this stone up to the cloudy sky and rotating it, you could pinpoint the location of the sun even when it was hidden by thick cloud cover. It's an almost magical sounding technology, like something out of a fantasy novel. And it shows the incredible ingenuity of your ancestors. Imagine having a magic rock that points to the sun. It sounds unbelievable, but the evidence for its use is there. And it's a silent hero of countless journeys. Without it, you'd be floating aimlessly in a sea of gray. Your journeys also rely heavily on a deep understanding of natural signs. You learn to read the waves, the currents, the flight paths of birds, and even the type of seaweed floating in the water. A certain type of bird might only fly within a certain distance of land. So you know you're getting close when you see it. It's a holistic kind of navigation, a constant dialogue between you and the natural world. It requires a quiet mind and a sharp eye, not the frantic movements of a warrior. Historians still argue whether Vikings had a formal, written-down system of navigational rules or if it was all passed down through oral tradition and apprenticeship. A kind of hands-on, learn-as-you-go process. You, however, know that the most important lessons are the ones you learn from the sea itself. A seasoned navigator, a wise elder of the crew, can teach you 1,000 things. But the sea will teach you 1,001. And it's that last one that will save your life. You close your eyes, the gentle rocking of the ship a lullaby, and dream of the open water and the vast, starry sky that is your guide. The journey ahead is long, but you are not lost. You know where you are going. You have a plan. You're finally awake, and the first order of business is to inspect your cargo. You walk the length of your ship. The Sea Goose. Its wooden deck cool and slightly damp beneath your boots. The air is filled with the scent of tar, salt, and the distinct, earthy aroma of your livelihood. This is where the story gets really boring and really important. You're not carrying chests of gold and jewels plundered from some far-off land. No, your ship is filled with the much more valuable, much more mundane goods that fuel an entire civilization. The real wealth of the Vikings wasn't in stolen treasures, but in the slow, steady flow of everyday items. A mainstream historical fact is that the primary cargo of a nar was not weapons or luxury items, but bulk goods. Think of things like timber, firewood, dried fish, and grain. These were the essential building blocks of life. For example, if you were sailing from Norway to the British Isles, you might be carrying a massive amount of timber, a resource that was scarce in certain regions and desperately needed for building houses and ships. Your profits came from the sheer volume of goods you could transport. It's not about a single, huge score, it's about 1,000 small, steady transactions. It's the difference between hitting the lottery and getting a regular paycheck. You run your hand over a great pile of bundled wool. Its lanolin oil sent a sharp, clean note in the air. This wool is a huge part of your trade. It's tough, waterproof, and perfect for making the kind of thick, warm clothing that keeps your people alive through the brutal winters. A quirky tidbit about this specific cargo is that you would often carry wool not just as a raw material but as finished textiles. Like the aforementioned VAML, this cloth was a recognized form of currency, a kind of pre-modern crypto that everyone understood and accepted. It was standardized by law, so you knew that a bolt of VAML from Hedeby was worth the same as a bolt from Dublin. It's a beautifully simple system that ensured fairness and prevented you from getting ripped off by some shady merchant in a muddy port town. Your crew is busy securing the cargo for the journey ahead. A couple of men are checking the seals on barrels of fish oil. Another is ensuring the ropes holding a massive stack of timbers are tight. This is the real labor. The kind of muscle-straining, back-breaking work that keeps the world turning. You're the one in charge. The one who has to make sure everything is perfect. Because a single mistake, a leaky barrel, a loose rope, could cost you your entire fortune and your ship. Historians still argue whether the Viking trading networks were primarily driven by the need for these staple goods or if they were a more complex system also catering to the burgeoning demand for luxury items among the emerging noble class. You, however, know that you're doing it for both. The bulk goods are your bread and butter, the steady income that feeds your family and your crew, while the smaller, more expensive items, amber, furs, and finely crafted metalwork, are the high-risk, high-reward ventures that might make you truly wealthy. You're a portfolio manager. In a very muddy, very smelly way, you look out at the churning gray water, the low, overcast sky. It's time to set sail. The cargo is secure, the crew is ready, and the great journey to the next market is about to begin. The journey has begun, and the world outside the ship is a blur of gray-blue water and low-hanging clouds. You spend your time mending a sail, checking the ropes, and keeping an eye on the horizon. But your mind is already in the next port, in the bustling hub of commerce where you'll sell your cargo and buy new goods. These places, the Emporia, were the true heart of the Viking trading world. They were not glorious capitals but muddy, chaotic, and incredibly vital settlements that sprang up at the crossroads of major trade routes. Think of them as the ancient world's version of a truck stop and a bustling international market all rolled into one. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking trading centers like Hedeby in Denmark and Birka in Sweden were not just markets, they were complex, planned towns. They had distinct living quarters, workshops for craftsmen like smiths and jewelers, and wharves where ships could be loaded and unloaded. These were not temporary encampments. They were permanent settlements that grew from simple gathering points into sophisticated centers of commerce and culture. It's a bit like seeing a small farmer's market suddenly evolve into a major city, complete with traffic, bureaucracy, and a whole lot of interesting smells. You've been to Hedeby, a place you remember vividly. The noise of 1,000 different conversations in a dozen different languages. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. The clatter of artisans' hammers. It was a sensory overload. But you also remember the order. You'd move from the harbor, where you'd offload your timber and furs, to the central market, where you'd haggle for silver and fine textiles, and then to the craftsman's quarter, where you might commission a new tool or repair an old one. It was a well-oiled machine, even if it looked like chaos. A quirky tidbit about these towns is that they were incredibly multicultural. You'd find not just Vikings from all over Scandinavia, but also Frisian merchants, Slavic traders, and even Arab and Byzantine dignitaries. These were the melting pots of the early medieval world. A place where you could buy a fur from the far north and an amber bead from the Baltic in the same afternoon. It was the original global economy, happening right there in the mud. You are a small part of this massive machine, a single cog in a vast network. But you know your role is important. Without people like you, these towns would have nothing to trade. Without your ship and your crew, the goods would never arrive. Historians still argue whether the growth of these trading hubs was a natural, organic process driven by supply and demand, or if they were deliberately founded and controlled by powerful kings and jarls to consolidate their power and wealth. You, however, know that it was a bit of both. You've seen firsthand how a charismatic jarl could attract traders and craftsmen to a new settlement. And you've also seen how a good location, a reliable trade route, and a lot of hard work could turn a muddy riverbank into a thriving town. The journey to the next one, wherever it may be, is a promise of new beginnings and new opportunities. The wind is a constant companion now. A low whistle against the rigging of the sea goose. You are well into the journey. And the open sea has given way to the slow, steady progress of a great river. This is the River Road, a legendary network of waterways that will take you deep into the east. A land of unimaginable wealth and strange new cultures. This isn't just a trip, it's an odyssey of commerce. It's the equivalent of a modern-day trucker driving the Silk Road. Except the truck is a wooden boat and the road is a series of interconnected rivers and portage. The challenges are immense, and the rewards are even greater. A mainstream historical fact is that this route, stretching from the Baltic Sea all the way to the Byzantine Empire, was a primary artery for Viking traders. They didn't just sail around the continent, they went right through it, following rivers like the Dnieper and the Volga. This was a long, arduous journey that could take months. A testament to the traders' incredible endurance and desire for profit. You and your crew would have to unload the ship at certain points, haul it over land, a process known as portage, and then relaunch it in the next river. It's back-breaking, exhausting work, and it's the kind of thing that makes you question your life choices at 3 a.m. in the middle of a forest. As you guide the ship, you see the banks of the river change. The familiar, cold forests of the north give way to new species of trees and different types of animals. You're entering a new world, a place where the people speak in a language you only partially understand. A quirky tidbit about this journey is that the Vikings often acted as middlemen, trading furs, honey, and enslaved people from the Slavic regions for silver, silks, and spices from the Arab and Byzantine worlds. The journey was filled with these small transactions. These little deals that would add up to a fortune by the time you reached your final destination. You'd trade a bundle of beaver pelts for a few ounces of silver, which you would then use to buy a small jar of a luxury spice you couldn't even name. It's a game of leveraging local resources for global goods. And you're a master of it. Historians still argue whether the River Road was a Viking invention or if it was an ancient trade route that they simply adopted and dominated. You, however, know that your people made it their own. You built the ships, you navigated the treacherous waters, and you established the trading posts that made this route a viable economic engine. You and your crew are not just travelers, you're the living embodiment of a grand economic system. As you float down the wide, slow-moving river, you feel a sense of purpose. You're not a raider, you're a merchant. Your legacy isn't in what you've taken, but in what you've brought. The journey is long, the dangers are real, but the promise of the shimmering towers of Byzantium at the end of it all is enough to keep you going. The sun is setting, and you pull the ship toward the bank for the night. Another day on the river. Another day closer to the riches of the east. The sun is a pale orb in the sky, and you're mending a tear in the sail. A rhythmic, repetitive task that you could do in your sleep. Your mind, however, isn't on the sale. It's on the village you're about to visit. A small trading post where you hope to exchange some of your goods for a good price. And as you think of the negotiations to come, your thoughts turn to your wife back home. She's not just a wife, she's a businesswoman in her own right. The quiet, competent force behind your entire operation. While you're out here navigating rivers and fending off bandits, she's back home running things. A crucial, often unseen part of your success. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking women held a remarkable amount of authority and independence compared to their contemporaries in other parts of Europe. They could own property, divorce their husbands, and even demand compensation for assault. But in the world of commerce, their role was even more pronounced. They were the ones who often managed the household finances, ran the farms, and organized the day-to-day business while the men were away on long trading voyages. Your wife, for instance, is in charge of your home workshop, a small but bustling place where she and your daughters weave the very camel you're hoping to sell. It's a silent partnership, a two-part business where you handle the logistics and she handles the production. You remember your last conversation with her, her steady, calm eyes as she gave you a list of things to look for, a specific type of loom, a new kind of spindle, and a fine silver buckle she wanted for her cloak. She's not just a homemaker, she's a partner. A quirky tidbit is that in many Viking households, the keys to the family's strongboxes and the food stores were a symbol of the wife's authority. She held the power of the purse, so to speak. This gave her a huge amount of control over the family's resources. And by extension, its economic future. It's a very modern-sounding arrangement in a world that feels so ancient. It's a quiet power, but a very real one. And you know you wouldn't be able to do what you do without it. You also know that your wife, and women like her, were the ones who kept the trading networks running on a micro level. She would deal with local merchants, trade surplus goods from the farm, and ensure that the family's finances were sound. She's the anchor that keeps your ship from drifting, both literally and figuratively. Historians still argue whether this social freedom for Viking women was a remnant of a more egalitarian past or if it was a practical necessity driven by the long absences of the men on raids and trading voyages. You, however, know that for you, it's just a simple fact of life. Your wife is your business partner, and her shrewdness and wisdom are as valuable as your ship and your crew. You finish mending the sail, the needle and thread, a small act of devotion to the journey, to your livelihood, and to the woman back home who is waiting for you to return. Hopefully with a full hold and an even fuller purse. The river is a ribbon of silver under the pale sky, and the river road stretches on, a seemingly endless journey of hard work and quiet perseverance. But this is more than just a trip to a market. You are not just a merchant, you are an ambassador. With every port you visit, you're not only trading goods, you're trading ideas, customs, and knowledge. The world of the Viking trader is one of slow, steady cultural exchange, a kind of osmosis that happens over shared meals and whispered conversations in a dozen different languages. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking traders were a major force in the spread of ideas and technology across the early medieval world. They brought back not just silver and silks, but also new techniques for metalworking, different styles of clothing, and foreign ideas about religion and governance. Your crew, for instance, learned a new way of tying a knot from a Slavic river guide. A knot so good that it holds a sail with a fierce, unyielding grip. You, in turn, showed a Byzantine merchant how to make a simple, but very effective, type of fish trap. It's a constant give and take. A silent trade of intellect that is as important as the trade of goods. It's a bit like a traveling seminar, but with a lot more mud and a lot less comfortable seating. You're now sitting around a campfire on the riverbank, sharing a meal of dried fish and hard bread with your crew and a few local traders. The language barrier is thick, but you manage to communicate with a mix of gestures, shared words, and a lot of patience. A quirky tidbit of this life is that a shared meal often served as the true starting point of a business negotiation. It was a moment of vulnerability and trust, a way to show that you came in peace and were willing to share your resources. This informal diplomacy was often the most effective kind, building relationships that would last for years and span thousands of miles. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? These kinds of odd, shared experiences are what build bridges between people. This journey is also changing you. You've seen so many different places, So many different ways of life. You've seen the elaborate gilded halls of a Byzantine official. And you've seen the simple, earthen homes of a Slavic farmer. You've heard stories that will change the way you see the world. Stories of heroes and gods you've never heard of. You are a vessel for more than just cargo. You are a vessel for culture. Historians still argue whether the Viking traders were conscious agents of cultural diffusion or if the spread of ideas was an unintended consequence of their relentless pursuit of profit. You, however, know that it was a bit of both. You didn't set out to change the world. But by simply living your life, by simply doing your job, you are. As the fire crackles and the stars begin to appear, you feel a deep sense of connection to the vast, interconnected world that you, a simple merchant, are helping to build. The journey continues, a steady, rhythmic plodding down the great river. You're constantly checking your goods, making sure the seals on the barrels are tight and the furs are dry. But you're also thinking about the final transaction. The moment you sell your cargo and get paid. And in your world, that's not always a simple matter of handing over some coins. The Viking economy was a chaotic, brilliant, and often bizarre blend of different currencies. And you, as a merchant, had to be fluent in all of them. A mainstream historical fact is that the Viking world operated on a silver-based economy. But not always in the form of coins. The most common form of payment was silver itself, often in the form of ingots, jewelry, or even hacked-up pieces of larger items. This was known as hack silver or silver. You'd have to carry a small scale and a set of weights, meticulously weighing each piece of silver to ensure you were getting a fair deal. It's a bit like paying for your groceries with a broken-up silver bracelet and a chunk of a spoon. And the cashier weighs each piece on a tiny scale to figure out the price. This system meant that the quality of the silver was paramount. And you had to be able to tell the difference between good silver and lead mixed in with a silver coating. A quick bite with your teeth could tell you everything you needed to know. But silver wasn't the only form of payment. A quirky tidbit is that you also dealt in what's known as commodity money. Things like the camel cloth we talked about earlier. But also furs, animal skins, and even dried fish could be used as a medium of exchange. In the far northern territories, where silver was scarce, a certain number of beaver pelts might be considered the standard price for a ship repair. It's a system based on practicality and what's available. A real-world example of bartering that's a lot more complicated than it sounds. Imagine trying to buy a new cloak with 3 frozen fish and a dried reindeer hide. It's a lot to keep track of. And it requires a mental ledger that's constantly being updated. This constant fluctuation in value and form of currency meant you had to be not only a good trader but also a keen-eyed appraiser. You had to know the value of a bolt of silk from Byzantium, a roll of fine linen from the Frankish lands, and a pile of furs from the forests of the Rus. Historians still argue whether this multi-currency system was a sign of a sophisticated, interconnected economy or a chaotic and unstable one. You, however, know that it was both. It was a system that worked for the time. A beautiful mess of trust, negotiation, and a lot of very careful weighing. The sun is setting, and you pull the boat to the bank. You're one day closer to the great market of Byzantium. One day closer to a purse full of silver. And you can't help but smile. The river continues its sluggish journey. And you and your crew are now a well-oiled machine. But this journey isn't a leisurely cruise. It is a constant battle against forces you can't control and threats you can't always see. You're not just a merchant, you're a survivor. The dangers of the journey are real. And they're not the glorious, heroic battles you hear about in the sagas. They are the mundane, terrifying realities that can end your life and your business in an instant. A mainstream historical fact is that the #1 threat to a Viking merchant was not a rival warrior but the sea itself. Storms were a constant menace, able to turn a calm sea into a boiling cauldron in a matter of minutes. The waves could swamp your ship, and the howling wind could tear your sail to shreds. You've been through a few, and you remember the absolute terror of watching a massive wave crest over your ship. The cold water washing over you. The sheer power of it. It's a humbling experience, a reminder that you are just a speck of wood and flesh in a vast, indifferent ocean. The storm is the great equalizer. The force that doesn't care if you're a king or a commoner. But the sea isn't the only danger. A quirky tidbit is that you also had to deal with more terrestrial threats, like disease and injury. A simple cut from a rope could become infected and kill you. A bad batch of water could lead to a dysentery that would wipe out half your crew. You carried a small pouch of herbs and salves, a basic medical kit, but your greatest weapon against these ailments was luck and a lot of very careful hygiene, which, let's be honest, wasn't always a priority on a long trading voyage. And then there were the petty criminals. The river pirates. The opportunistic bandits who saw a lonely merchant ship as an easy target. These weren't grand, organized armies. They were small groups of desperate men looking for an easy score. They'd hide in the reeds along the riverbank, and you had to be constantly on guard, your hand never far from the hilt of your knife. This is the life you've chosen. A life of constant vigilance and quiet courage. It's not the flashy courage of a berserker on the battlefield. It's the quiet courage of a man who knows a bad storm could end everything he's worked for. Historians still argue whether the Viking trading routes were relatively safe and well-traveled or if they were a lawless frontier where a man had to rely on his own strength and wits. You, however, know that the truth is somewhere in the middle. The routes were well-known, but they were also wild and unpredictable. And a moment of carelessness could cost you your life. As the day ends, you and your crew set a watch. A silent, grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. You are now approaching a small trading post on the banks of a tributary. A place that feels a million miles away from the great markets you visited. As you prepare to offload your goods and begin negotiations, you feel a quiet sense of pride. This isn't just about profit, it's about respect. Your success as a merchant has given you a status that a simple farmer or a fisherman could only dream of. The wealth you've accumulated isn't just for your own comfort. It's a social currency that elevates you and your family within your community. A mainstream historical fact is that in Viking society, wealth was a significant source of power and social standing. A successful merchant, a kaupmar, could become a person of influence, respected not just for his riches but for his knowledge of the wider world. You were a source of news, a purveyor of foreign goods, and a living testament to the possibility of a better life. You weren't a king, but you had a kind of soft power. A social capital that could open doors and earn you a seat at the table with the local jarl. Your reputation was everything, and a good one could make the difference between a successful business and a failed one. As you step ashore, you notice the way the locals look at you. There's a mix of curiosity and respect. You are a known quantity here. A reliable trader who always returns with a hold full of interesting goods. A quirky tidbit about this reputation is that a merchant's personal sagas and stories were often a key part of their social standing. The tales of your journeys, the storms you've weathered and the deals you've made, were as important as the silver in your purse. These stories weren't just for entertainment, they were a form of marketing. A way of building your brand and establishing your credibility in a world without business cards or online reviews. People trusted a merchant with a good story and a solid reputation. Historians still argue whether this increased social status for merchants was a new development in the Viking Age or if it was a continuation of an earlier system where a man's worth was tied to his material possessions. You, however, know that for you, it feels new, it feels earned. You didn't inherit this status, you built it. One careful transaction, one dangerous journey, and one honest deal at a time. The work is hard, the risks are high, but the reward is more than just money. It's the respect of your peers, the admiration of your family, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've made a name for yourself in a world that wasn't always kind to those without a sword. The sun is now a setting orange orb, casting long shadows across the small trading post, and you feel a quiet contentment in this brief moment of recognition. The wind is finally gone, and the air is still and cool. You're sitting in the longhouse of the trading post, the fire a warm, flickering beacon against the encroaching darkness. As your crew and the local traders talk and share stories, you pull out a small, carved wooden tablet and a piece of charcoal. This isn't just for doodling, this is your ledger, your memory, your historical record. You're jotting down the details of the day's transactions. A meticulous process that is as important as the transactions themselves. In a world without paper and spreadsheets, you have to be your own accountant. A mainstream historical fact is that much of what we know about Viking trade comes from runic inscriptions and archaeological finds of small, inscribed objects. The sagas, while often embellished, also contain a wealth of information about trade routes, goods, and social customs. For a merchant like you, these sagas weren't just epic tales, they were a form of institutional memory. A way of passing down crucial information about navigating treacherous waters and dealing with different cultures. You'd listen to the older traders tell their stories, not just for the thrill, but to learn from their triumphs and their failures. It's like a really old school business school, with a lot more meat and a lot more drama. Your wooden tablet is your personal record. On it, you carefully inscribe the details of your trade, how many beaver pelts you got for a specific amount of silver, the name of the man you traded with, the date, and the place. This is your proof, your contract, and your promise. A quirky tidbit is that you would often use a very simple runic script for these records. A kind of shorthand that was quick and easy to carve. These weren't grand, poetic inscriptions, but simple, practical notes that served a real purpose. Think of it as ancient note-taking. A bit like a post-it note, but on wood and with a much higher chance of being discovered 1,000 years later. Historians still argue whether the runic inscriptions we've found were primarily for practical purposes like record-keeping or if they were more often used for spiritual or commemorative reasons. You, however, know that for a merchant, they were all about the bottom line. They were your proof of ownership, your memory of a deal, and your historical record. Your work isn't just about moving goods, it's also about moving information. About creating a record of your life and your business. The fire crackles, and you lean closer. The flickering light illuminating your careful strokes on the wood. The past, the present, and the future of your business are all there, etched in wood, a testament to a life well lived and a business well run. The journey is nearing its end. Not just this one, but the entire era. The wind whispers a different story now. A tale of change and an end to the golden age of the Viking merchant. You can feel it in the air. A subtle shift in the way things are done. The chaotic, exciting, and dangerous world you've known is slowly, inexorably fading, giving way to a new kind of order. This isn't a sudden collapse but a slow, grinding process of transformation, like a great river slowly changing its course. A mainstream historical fact is that the decline of the classic Viking trading era was not a single event but a complex process driven by several factors. One of the most significant was the rise of powerful, centralized kingdoms in Scandinavia. Kings and nobles began to consolidate their power, establishing royal control over trade and taxation. The days of the independent merchant, the lone wolf who traveled wherever the winds took him, were numbered. The new rulers wanted a piece of the action, and they began to regulate and tax the trade routes, turning a wild frontier into a more structured, and often more restrictive, economic system. It's like your favorite local farmer's market getting bought out by a giant corporation. The produce is still there, but the rules are different, and the charm is gone. As you sail, you see more and more Christian symbols on the shores. And a quirky tidbit is that the slow adoption of Christianity also played a role in this transformation. The new religion brought with it new social structures and a different way of organizing society. The independent, pagan trading culture, with its reliance on personal sagas and a more fluid social structure, began to give way to a more rigid, feudal system. The old gods were fading, and with them, a certain way of life. The churches and monasteries that were popping up everywhere were not just centers of worship, they were also centers of wealth and power. And they began to play a significant role in the new economy. Historians still argue whether the end of the Viking Age was caused more by internal changes within Scandinavia or by external pressures from the more powerful kingdoms of Europe. You, however, know that it was a mix of both. You've seen the new Christian missionaries with their strange stories and their even stranger ideas about money and trade. You've also heard whispers of new laws and new taxes from the burgeoning kings back home. The world is getting smaller, and it's getting more organized, and there's less and less room for a lone wolf like you. The sun is setting, and you feel a quiet melancholy settle over. The river has finally given way to the open sea, and you are on the final leg of your journey home. The wind is at your back, pushing the sea goose steadily toward the familiar coastline. As the land comes into view, you feel a deep sense of a quiet closure. The world of the independent Viking merchant, the world you have so meticulously navigated, is fading, but your legacy, and the legacy of all the other traders, is not. The story of the raider is loud and bloody, but the story of the merchant is quiet and enduring. A mainstream historical fact is that the Viking trading networks laid the groundwork for the modern global economy. By connecting the disparate cultures of Scandinavia, the British Isles, Eastern Europe, and the Byzantine Empire, you and your fellow traders created the first truly international supply chain. You didn't just move goods, you moved the concept of trade itself. Normalizing the idea of commerce over vast distances. The towns you built became the cities of tomorrow. The routes you pioneered became the highways of a new era. The silver you traded became the basis for a new monetary system. Your silent, plodding work was the very engine of progress. Far more so than any single battle. As you look out at the horizon, you remember the faces of the people you've met, the Frisian merchant with his strange accent, the Slavic river guide with his quiet knowledge of the land, the Byzantine official with his gilded robes. A quirky tidbit is that the very word for merchant in Old Norse, kaupmar, is still used in various forms in modern Scandinavian languages. A quiet testament to the enduring importance of your profession. It's a linguistic ghost, a whisper from the past that reminds the present of the foundation upon which it was built. You weren't just a person of your time. You were a person who helped shape the time to come. Historians still argue whether the Viking Age should be defined by its raids or its trade. You, however, know in your bones that it was the trade that truly mattered. The raids were temporary, but the trade was permanent. The raids destroyed, but the trade built. The raids brought fear, but the trade brought connection. You are a part of that enduring connection. You are a bridge between cultures, a weaver of the economic fabric of the world. The sun is setting on your journey, on your era, but it is rising on the world you helped to create. The gentle rocking of the ship is a soothing rhythm, a slow, steady pulse that has been your constant companion for so long. You can see the faint lights of your home port now, a warm, beckoning glow against the deepening twilight. The work is done, the ship is full, and your mind is at ease. The creak of the wood, the slap of the water against the hull, these sounds are your lullaby. There is nothing left to do now but to drift, to surrender to the slow, steady pull of the current. The journey is over, the stories are told, you are home. Let the soft hum of the night take over. The silence of the sea a final, peaceful embrace. You can feel your body relaxing, your thoughts slowing, a quiet calm settling over you like a thick blanket. You are safe, you are at peace, you are finally, completely, home.